Marissa DiNapoli's life looked ordinary from the outside, but that was what made her sudden disappearance so chilling. She was 27 years old, a nurse who worked long shifts at the local hospital in New Jersey, and she had a reputation for being dependable to the point of perfection. Friends could set their clocks by her routines. She never failed to return a call, never skipped work, and never showed up late when she promised to be somewhere. To the people who knew her, she was the person you could count on in a crisis. That was why, when she suddenly vanished on a June evening, it immediately struck everyone as deeply wrong. It wasn't like her, not even close. On that Friday night, Marissa's shift ended just before sunset. She was tired, but according to her coworkers, she was cheerful and looking forward to a quiet weekend. She mentioned picking up groceries on her way home to cook dinner with her roommate. She walked out of the hospital doors, waved goodbye to a colleague, and then seemed to vanish into thin air. Hours passed without any word from her. Her roommate tried calling, then texting, but the messages went unanswered. By midnight, when her bed was still empty and her car had not pulled into the driveway, worry turned into panic. The following morning, the police received a call reporting her missing. The first breakthrough came quickly. Marissa's car was located in the parking lot of a nearby grocery store, exactly where she had said she would go. From the outside, nothing looked disturbed. The doors were locked, the keys still sat in the ignition, and her phone was left in plain view on the passenger seat. It was as if she had stepped out for a moment and simply never returned. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, and no trail to follow. The unsettling neatness of the scene made detectives suspicious. Her family rushed into town as soon as they heard the news. Friends plastered her face on flyers, desperate for leads, while the police combed through surveillance cameras in the area. At first, there was hope that she might have wandered off or had some kind of accident. But as the hours stretched into days, the truth became harder to ignore. Marissa hadn't left voluntarily. The grocery store cameras showed her car pulling into the lot around 7:15 p.m. She parked, but the footage never showed her getting out of the vehicle or walking toward the store entrance. The angle of the cameras was limited, leaving frustrating gaps in the timeline. Detectives wondered if she had been lured away, or if someone was waiting for her when she arrived. The eerie stillness of the car, left behind like an empty shell, suggested planning. Whoever was involved had taken her quickly, efficiently, and without leaving obvious traces. The neighborhood buzzed with fear. Parents held their children closer, women avoided walking alone at night, and whispers spread about who might have done it. Everyone wanted answers, but at that moment, there were none. The case was already shaping into something dark, and investigators knew this was only the beginning of a very unsettling story. When detectives began digging into Marissa's personal life, one name came up again and again: Ethan Keller. He was 29, a mechanic who had dated Marissa for almost 2 years before their messy breakup 6 months earlier. Friends described him as charming at first, the kind of guy who could make you laugh with a sarcastic remark, but they also said that charm didn't last. As time went on, Ethan grew possessive, controlling, and quick to anger. The relationship spiraled into constant fights, and eventually Marissa ended things. But the break hadn't been clean. Neighbors recalled hearing arguments outside her apartment long after the breakup, with Ethan shouting that she would regret leaving him. Marissa's friends later admitted that she sometimes seemed afraid of him, though she rarely went into details. Because of that history, investigators naturally considered Ethan a person of interest. They tried to reach him for questioning, but their calls went unanswered. When they visited his apartment, they found it abandoned. His landlord claimed he had moved out suddenly a week earlier, leaving behind only a few scraps of furniture and a refrigerator full of expired food. That discovery raised alarm bells. Why would someone vanish at the same time Marissa disappeared? As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered troubling details about Ethan's recent behavior. Bank records revealed a series of large cash withdrawals in the days leading up to Marissa's disappearance. The pattern showed a man preparing to go off the grid. His car was missing too, and within 48 hours, investigators traced activity on his credit card to a gas station in Texas, near the border. From there, the trail showed he had crossed into Mexico. His sudden flight made him the prime suspect. The community immediately latched onto this theory. To them, it made sense. The volatile ex-boyfriend had always seemed dangerous, and now he had fled the country right when his former partner vanished. Media outlets ran with the story, painting Ethan as the villain who couldn't let go. The pressure on the police grew, with the public demanding to know why he wasn't already in custody. But detectives knew they needed more than suspicion. They needed proof. As the investigation continued, stories about Ethan's darker side emerged. Old friends spoke of his temper, recalling bar fights and violent outbursts. A former girlfriend came forward, saying he had once threatened her when she tried to break things off. Each revelation painted him as more unstable. At the same time, there was a puzzle detectives couldn't ignore. No physical evidence yet tied Ethan to Marissa's disappearance. Her car, her phone, and the parking lot showed nothing directly linking back to him. Still, his decision to flee made it impossible to ignore him. Investigators began coordinating with border authorities and Mexican police to locate him, while the media amplified his name across every headline. In the eyes of many, the case was solved. But what no one realized then was that the truth was far more complicated, and Ethan's disappearance into Mexico was only one part of a tangled story that was about to take an even darker turn. While investigators were focused on tracking Ethan across the border, other clues quietly began surfacing back in New Jersey that suggested the case might not be as straightforward as it appeared. The grocery store parking lot where Marissa's car was found became the center of attention. Detectives went through every available second of security footage, scrutinizing each vehicle and person captured that evening. That was when something unusual appeared. A black sedan pulled into the lot just a few minutes after Marissa arrived. It didn't park directly next to her, but it hovered close by, shifting spaces a couple of times as though the driver was watching. The car stayed for more than half an hour, and when Marissa's vehicle was left abandoned, the sedan drove away. At first, police assumed it might have been coincidence, but when they ran the plates, the vehicle belonged to someone very familiar to Marissa, her co-worker Brian Russo. Brian was a 32-year-old orderly at the same hospital where Marissa worked. He was quiet, soft-spoken, and often described as shy to the point of awkwardness. He had worked alongside Marissa for over a year, and most people barely noticed him. To colleagues, he was simply there, dependable and unremarkable. Yet as detectives looked closer, his name came up in ways that unsettled them. Co-workers admitted that Brian often volunteered for shifts with Marissa, and some recalled seeing him linger near her station, offering to help with small tasks she hadn't asked for. No one thought much of it at the time, but in hindsight, it looked more like obsession than kindness. Detectives brought Brian in for questioning. He explained that he had been in the grocery store lot that night to run errands and claimed he never saw Marissa. He said he had parked for a while because he was on his phone. The story was simple, but it left gaps that didn't add up. Why did the cameras show him shifting his car around? Why did he never go into the store? His answers felt rehearsed, but without evidence, investigators couldn't pin anything on him. Still, the discovery opened a new direction in the case. While the public was fixated on Ethan as the villain, police began quietly digging into Brian's life. What they found raised more questions than answers. He had no alibi for the night Marissa vanished, and co-workers revealed he sometimes made uncomfortable comments about her, describing her as special or different from everyone else. These remarks had been brushed off as socially awkward attempts at conversation, but now they carried a darker weight. The contrast between Ethan's explosive past and Brian's hidden strangeness created a puzzle. Was the violent ex-boyfriend really responsible, or had everyone overlooked someone much closer, someone who blended into the background? As detectives weighed both suspects, they realized Marissa's disappearance was far more complex than a simple story of jealousy and rage. The black sedan in the parking lot was proof that another figure had been in the shadows that night, watching, waiting, and perhaps acting when no one else was looking. The closer investigators looked at Brian Russo, the more unsettling details surfaced. On the outside, he lived a simple life. He rented a small one-bedroom apartment not far from the hospital, drove the same black sedan for years, and kept to himself. Neighbors described him as polite but distant, the kind of man who nodded hello but never stopped to chat. To most, he was invisible. Yet when detectives began pulling at the threads of his past, the picture that emerged was far from harmless. Years earlier, Brian had worked at another hospital in Pennsylvania. Personnel records revealed that he had been quietly let go after a series of complaints from female colleagues. Several nurses accused him of inappropriate comments and following them into the parking garage late at night. None of the accusations escalated to police reports, but the pattern was troubling. The hospital chose not to publicize the reasons for his departure, and he was able to find another job in New Jersey without much difficulty. This buried history was a red flag investigators couldn't ignore. With a search warrant in hand, detectives combed through Brian's apartment. At first glance, it was tidy and ordinary, with nothing obviously suspicious. But tucked away in his dresser drawer was something that changed everything. Among folded shirts and socks was Marissa's missing hospital badge. She had used it daily to clock into her shifts, and her family confirmed it was not something she ever misplaced. The discovery tied Brian directly to her disappearance. Detectives also uncovered notebooks filled with erratic writing. Some pages described Marissa in obsessive detail: her smile, her routines, the way she spoke to patients. It was clear Brian had developed an unhealthy fixation. Despite this evidence, Brian maintained his innocence when confronted. He claimed he had found the badge in the hospital parking lot and kept it without thinking. He insisted the notes were harmless, just the private ramblings of a lonely man. He denied following Marissa and repeated that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. His explanations were thin, but without Marissa's body, the case remained circumstantial. Meanwhile, across the border, Ethan Keller was finally tracked down. He had settled in a small Mexican town near the coast, living under his own name and using the last of his cash withdrawals to survive. Local authorities arrested him and handed him over to U.S. officials. Under questioning, Ethan admitted he fled because he feared being accused. He claimed he had been drinking heavily on the night Marissa vanished and panicked when he heard the news the next day. He swore he had nothing to do with it, insisting that leaving the country was a cowardly mistake, not proof of guilt. The investigation reached a tense crossroads. On one side was Ethan, the volatile ex-boyfriend who had fled suspiciously. On the other was Brian, the quiet co-worker with disturbing evidence linking him to Marissa. Detectives were split, unsure which direction the truth pointed. For the public, the case seemed solved the moment Ethan was arrested. But behind closed doors, investigators couldn't shake the possibility that the real danger wasn't the man who ran, but the one who stayed close, hiding his obsession in plain sight. Weeks passed with the investigation pulling in two directions, but it was a group of hikers who finally pushed the case to its grim conclusion. On a humid morning in late July, they were walking a wooded trail about 20 miles outside town when they noticed freshly disturbed soil near a clearing. The ground was uneven, and a faint odor lingered in the air. Out of curiosity, they investigated, only to uncover what looked like fabric beneath the dirt. Authorities were called immediately, and by the afternoon, the site was confirmed as a shallow grave. Inside were the remains of Marissa DiNapoli. The discovery shifted the case from a missing person investigation to a homicide. Forensic teams worked meticulously, collecting fibers, soil samples, and anything that could point to a suspect. Marissa's body showed clear signs of strangulation, and while decomposition made some details difficult to establish, there were no indications of random violence. This was personal, deliberate, and methodical. The grave had been dug with care, not in haste, suggesting planning rather than panic. Tests soon revealed the evidence investigators needed. DNA found on Marissa's clothing pointed directly to Brian Russo. The results were undeniable, and when paired with the hospital badge and the disturbing notes found in his apartment, a chilling picture came into focus. Brian had been stalking her for months, carefully watching her routines, and waiting for a chance to act. The night she disappeared, he had followed her into the grocery store parking lot, intercepted her before she could even step inside, and took her away without leaving a trace behind. His quiet, unassuming demeanor had allowed him to fly under the radar, while suspicion remained fixed on Ethan. When detectives confronted Brian with the DNA evidence, his calm facade cracked. He broke down, though he never offered a clear confession. Instead, he rambled about loneliness, rejection, and feeling invisible. To him, Marissa had been a fixation, an anchor in a life that felt empty. But to investigators, his words only confirmed what they already knew. He had developed a dangerous obsession and acted on it in the most horrific way. Ethan Keller, meanwhile, was cleared of involvement. His DNA did not appear anywhere on Marissa, and the timeline of events proved he had not even been near the crime scene. His decision to flee had been a desperate attempt to escape blame, not a cover-up of guilt. Still, his cowardice and poor judgment nearly overshadowed the truth. For weeks, the public had vilified him, convinced he was the monster behind Marissa's disappearance, when in reality, he was a red herring that delayed justice. Brian Russo was arrested, charged with first-degree murder, and eventually sentenced to life in prison without parole. The verdict brought some closure to Marissa's family, though the weight of their loss never lifted. The case left a lasting scar on the community, a reminder of how easily danger can hide behind an ordinary face. While everyone's eyes had been fixed on the volatile ex-boyfriend, the real predator had been lurking in plain sight all along, quiet and unnoticed, until it was too late. Thanks for watching this episode of Crime Uncovered. If you found the story gripping, don't forget to like the video, share it with friends who love true crime, and hit the subscribe button with the bell icon so you never miss our next disturbing case. Every click helps us uncover more untold stories.